Hi there guys, Mr. Martin here again. Thanks so much for joining me. Now in this video what we're going to be exploring is, well, you're going to have to bear with me with this one because it gets kind of wacky, it gets a little bit strange, it gets a little bit absurd, but hey, when we're talking about Freud, what isn't? This is the psychoanalytic approach to exploring dreams. Now notice here we're not going to be explaining sleep using the psychoanalytic approach. To a psychoanalyst, sleep isn't really all that interesting. It's just something that happens. But what's more interesting to them is what happens when you are asleep. And of course, is the dreams. So let's dive straight in. In the 1900s, Freud produced an absolutely seminal piece of work. He called it Die Traumdeutung. Aren't you all impressed with my German accent? In English, that's the interpretation of dreams. It was a remarkable book. In it, Freud argued essentially that during the waking hours, your id, remember the id as being the primal, the animalistic, the purely pleasure-driven part of your psyche. During the waking hours, the impulses of the id are more or less masked by the ego. They're more or less suppressed, they're pushed down a little bit. He says, well, yeah, I know you want to shoplift that chocolate bar, but we're not going to because we'll get arrested. When you go to sleep, however, your ego more or less switches off. Your ego, remember, is you. So it makes sense that when you go to sleep, your ego switches off a little bit. This means your id gets to run riot. And essentially what Freud is arguing here is that your dreams are essentially a deeper glimpse into the hidden desires of your id. Now, we can't explain it any way better than the man himself did, so he wrote it this way. The virtuous man contents himself with dreaming, that which the wicked man does in actual life. To Freud, what was happening when you dreamt was all your base, your most wicked, your most basically evil desires were running rampant through your head. So how come then we don't really dream about evil stuff? How come we don't really dream about purely wicked and awful and really disturbing things? Well, Freud would explain this in terms of something called wish fulfillment. Your id wants something. Perhaps that desire is sexual. Most of Freud's thoughts tend to be. Perhaps it was food-based. Perhaps it was something else. We don't know. But your id wants something. However, if it were to show you that in all of its raw, pure, primal, animalistic form, you're going to wake up disturbed. You're going to wake up thinking, my God, was that really me that was thinking all that thing? That was horrible. What's wrong with me? No, Freud would say, okay, you have your superego in check. You have your superego to say, no, let's translate this. Let's turn these awful, these disgusting images into something a little bit nicer, something a little bit more symbolic. This means you don't wake up thinking, oh my God, what's wrong with me? However, you do wake up a little bit confused because you're thinking, well, what on earth was that dream about? Now, Freud argues that dreams have both manifest and latent contents. He would call der Traum manifest, he would call that the weird, the wacky, the bizarre images that were running through your head, the actual dream imagery itself. But to Freud, underneath the dream manifest, there was der Traum latent, the latent dream. This was the true meaning, the true purpose, the actual wish that your id wants to fulfill. That was lying underneath. And it was the job of a psychoanalyst to survey through, to actually get rid of all that manifest content, to try and dig through it all like an old gold panner in the American West, and to try and figure out what it was your mind wants. Let's have a think about one of Freud's most influential studies here. This is 1909. It's called The Study of Little Hands. Now, to do this, we need to understand one of Freud's more colourful ideas. We call that the Oedipus complex. Now, I don't want to get into too much what the Oedipus complex is. You can read about this at your leisure. However, prepare to be a little bit disturbed, a little bit baffled perhaps, because essentially what Freud argues here is that little boys, when they get to a certain age, we're talking maybe toddler age, they start to view their mother as more than their mother, shall we say. They start to view their mother as a romantic figure. Now that's all I'll say about it, because I don't want to get too far into it, but there's lots of videos and lots of detailed documents around about the Oedipus complex, so you look at them in your time. However, Freud believed then that he could study this complex, this Oedipus complex, by dream analysis. He figured that viewing your mother romantically, that is pretty awful. I'm sure we all agree about that. So if you were going to dream about it, it would be something weird, it would be something wacky. You would have that manifest content on top. So Freud believed that he could analyze someone's dreams, dig through the manifest content, and find some evidence for his Oedipus complex. Now, little Hans was this little kid here. He was a Viennese toddler at the time. His father was a man called Herr Graf. Little Hans, by the way, was a pseudonym. We don't know what Hans's real name was. But what Freud did was asked little Hans's father, "What's your son dreaming about? Tell me about his dreams, and we'll try and see what they really mean." Now, among little Hans's dreams were dreams of a plumber, dreams about horses, dreams about a giraffe being crushed by a larger giraffe. Now, to anyone else apart from Freud, these are just kind of weird and wacky images, right? But to Freud, these were perfect examples of the Oedipus complex in manifest content. A plumber is generally a man who knows lots about fixing things. A plumber has pipes. He might fit new pipes onto things. You see where I'm getting at here? Horses. Well, it wasn't female horses that Hans was dreaming about. It was only male horses. Stallions he was dreaming about. Yeah? A giraffe being crushed by a larger giraffe. Perhaps that represents his Hans being crushed by his father. He resents his father because he's the only one that gets to touch his mother. It's pretty weird. I will grant you that. It's a bit of a stretch to think about these things. But this is an interesting case nonetheless, because little Hans is having these weird and wacky dreams. Maybe they are about his romantic dreams, his romantic thoughts rather, about his mother. We don't know that, but to Freud, they definitely were. Now, this is what he's really talking about here. Dream censorship. When you are dreaming about something, sometimes those desires can be so disturbing that your dreams are censored. Your superego, remember this angel on your shoulder, doesn't want you to be subject to these awful images, so it does whatever it can to translate that, to turn it into something a little bit nicer. Now, you get loads of these books. You'll find them in Waterstones and on Amazon, Dream Symbology and How to Translate Your Dreams. They're all nonsense. Don't bother wasting your money on them. However, to Freud, here's what happened. It was all about symbolism. Basically, to Freud, anything that was in your dream meant something. It was there for a reason. Sometimes that reason was very, very confusing. So he would really, really dig deep into what he thought these different things were. Sometimes dreams are far too harmful. They're not even bothered to be translated into something symbolic. They are just purely deleted straight away. So when you wake up, the superego erases them, protecting the conscious mind from whatever it was you were dreaming about. This could perhaps explain why the majority of dreams are difficult to recall. You try this the next time you wake up from a dream. Unless you write it down, chances are you are going to forget that dream very, very quickly. Even if you think it's really significant, oh my goodness, what was I dreaming about there? You will forget that in a couple of minutes, perhaps half an hour's time. Why do you forget it? Why does your brain bother to let you see it in the first place if it's not harmful? To Freud, this is what was happening. The superego was erasing your dreams as you went. One of the things we have to talk about here is something called dream work. Now, a psychoanalyst like Freud or Breuer or Jung of the time would sit down with their patient and would talk to them about what their dreams were. What did you see inside your mind? Now, they would sit down, record every single image, and they would try and work backwards. What did it mean that this person dreamt about a sword fight? What did it mean that this person dreamt about being in a dancing competition? Now, there's lots of different types of dream work. There's things like displacement, representability. There's things like symbolism. There's things like secondary translation. There's lots of different things which we won't go into. But basically dream work is all about translating your latent content into manifest content. You can look that up at your leisure, but very interesting nonetheless. Let's evaluate this approach very quickly, because I'm sure you've got a lot of thoughts about what Freud's really talking about in terms of sleep and dreams here. Let's start with the positives. Solms, in the very late 1990s, actually tells us a little bit of scientific evidence for Freud's thoughts. What's that you say? Scientific evidence for Freud? Yes, absolutely, that's what we're saying. In this study, some patients who were suffering from strokes had a lot of damage to their front forebrain. Now, the forebrain is right at the front of your brain. It's basically in front of your forehead. That area of your brain governs desire. It governs emotion. It governs things that you want. If you damage that area, basically the seat of the id, then you stop dreaming. So if you've got no desire, you also don't dream. Perhaps some evidence for Freud? It's also very applicable to trauma survivors and post-traumatic stress disorder patients. These people tend to have lots of very disturbing, very evocative, high imagery dreams, nightmares even. Psychotherapists and psychoanalysts have a field day trying to work through all these patients and all the dreams that they're having, trying to translate them, trying to figure out a way for them to deal with their issues. And they often have very, very good success rates with these patients. So it seems to be that dream analysis and using someone's dream to translate into something else seems to have a little bit of credence behind it. In negatives, however, obviously poor research evidence. We don't have much scientific evidence that says dream analysis and the id translating all these horrible things into the superego translating all these horrible things that your id is showing you in your head. We don't know that that works. All we've got really is Freud's word for that. A very biased sample. Most of Freud's work is based in Vienna. Most of it is based around women. Is that relevant to men from China or kids from Japan? We don't know. And finally, this is pure interpretation. This is just somebody's word for it. Jung, for example, in the 1960s, he himself is a psychoanalyst, so you'd expect him to come to the same conclusions as Freud. No, absolutely not. He comes to completely different conclusions about people's dreams. Seems to be that dream analysis is just based around the person that's doing it and nothing about what the dreaming is actually about. Still, quite interesting, right? That's everything for this video, guys. In our next video, we're going to be looking at the cognitive approach to sleep and dreams. Some quite interesting stuff there as well. But until then, guys, have a lovely, lovely day, and we'll see you again next time. Cheers!